Hello and welcome to another Naxos live stream with my special guest, Sara Aimée Smiseth, and talking about a new recording she has. You just heard one of the pieces. And Sara, you are a pianist, you're doing lecture concerts, and you happen to be in the American Midwest right now. I think in Minneapolis, somewhere close to there.
Yeah, that's right. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and I'm always glad to talk about Agathe Backer Grøndahl's music. But yeah, I usually I'm based in Oslo, Norway, but now I'm here in Minneapolis, playing a few concerts with the Edvard Grieg Society of Minneapolis, and showing Agathe Backer Grøndahl's music with this new album that came out just a few days ago. Yeah.
It's very exciting, and you're off to Kansas after this. I just want to let people know where they can look for you or go hear you play.
Yeah, sure. I'm off to Kansas, and then hopefully I'll be back also in the US maybe sometime next year and play more concerts. So yeah, very excited to be here.
So George Bernard Shaw, who was in fact one of the great music critics of that century, wrote that Agathe Backer Grøndahl was one of the century's greatest pianists. But she's mostly unknown to people today, especially as a composer. Now, thanks to your album, I hope she starts finding a larger public. How did you first discover her music?
I think for if you're a Norwegian musician or classical musician, that's like Agathe Backer Grøndahl. It's a name that you heard. She's that one woman composer that people talk about in Norway. But so that it was a name that I heard about when I was a student, and I looked a little bit into it, and most of the information I found from music history book that basically she was this famous pianist who wrote a few songs and some piano music. But I always thought that there had to be more to her than just that. So last year, actually, I think it was, or 2 years ago, I decided to make a whole concert about her. And then I sat down to, prepare what I was going to present, the music, and what was the stories I was going to tell about her. And I was kind of disappointed because, again, in all the music history books in Norway that I could find, it was sort of the same thing being repeated. She was this famous pianist who wrote just a few, small piano pieces and some songs. But then I came across this doctoral thesis written by a woman called Camilla Hambro. That was written, I think, in 2008 or 9, where she has gone through, just about every available source and created this incredibly well-documented full picture of who this woman really, really was. So based on that, I was able to really get a better picture of who she was as a composer, and such an interesting person who used to be a really public figure in Scandinavia, but today most Norwegians barely know her name, actually.
That sounds like a perfect project for being locked down or something.
Yeah, it kind of was, and I did get to play a few concerts until I think the second lockdown, and then I decided to apply for some grants, and I was able to finance making a promo video and record some of the music. And I wasn't actually thinking of making it a whole CD, but then the result became pretty good, so I decided to go back into the studio, and the result was a full CD, full album with lots of her music. I've intentionally picked different pieces, like a little bit from here, and just to show the variation in her music. Yeah.
Why don't we hear a little bit of her music now? Track 6, I'll let you introduce the piece.
Yeah, sure. That's one of her Norwegian folk music arrangements. It's a piece called Siklebekken. That's a folk tune after the famous Norwegian Hardanger fiddle player Myllargutten. So you can really hear some folk music in here, I think.
Agathe Backer Grøndahl, a Norwegian pianist and composer. Sara, can you give us a bit of background about her childhood and how she grew up so we appreciate her later accomplishments better? Sorry, you're muted.
No, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, she was born in the 1840s. I mean, 1847. But she grew up a little south of Oslo, in Norway, and her parents, they were, both from fairly wealthy merchant families, which I would say, in those days, I guess you had to have resources to study and travel, and so I guess a lot of composers had that kind of background. But her parents, they had 4 daughters, and all of these 4 daughters would do either music or paint at a very high level. And in fact, 2 of them, Agathe and her sister Harriet, I mean, they would become among the greatest artists among their generations in Norway. Harriet as a painter and Agathe as a musician. But I think the reason why these daughters were so successful, I mean, their parents were very, very interested in art and music, and especially that their father would play music to them and improvise. And in this environment of creativity and musicality, Agathe composed her first piece at the age of 5 for piano. And then she was 9. It was kind of a lucky coincidence that the whole family moved to Oslo, to the capital, which back then had like 30,000 people living there. Not too much, but I mean, it was at least a bigger city, and there were some good teachers there. And Agathe was able to have. Back then, he was the most famous composer in Norway. His name was Halvdan Kjærulf. He was kind of pre-Grieg, and yeah, so she had some great teachers there. But then she, finished her schooling and was kind of at a place where she had to choose where she was going to go in her life. And her mother, at this point, where she was 17, she started talking about marriage. But we do know from some letters that this was not something that Miss Backer was very interested in then, because she wanted to go abroad and study music, because there was no conservatory or higher music education in Norway at the time, so you had to go abroad. Yeah.
Why don't we listen to another short piece here? It's a very short one. That's track 16.
Yeah.
And once again, I will let you introduce it.
Yeah, sure. It's another one of our folk music arrangements. So it's a Halling. It's from her opus 33.
Wonderful. Sara, what attracts you to this music? What do you like about the music? Because I heard music when I grew up listening to music, lots of music, and it's not a given that you like it. So what is it about this that you like?
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, it's such a great variation. You have the folk music arrangements, which kind of sound like Edvard Grieg. By the way, they were friends, Grieg and Backer Grøndahl, and they would exchange their music and advise each other. So it kind of went a little both ways. But you have that, but then you also have her concert etudes, which are much more kind of grand and more of in a European tradition, and you have her piano suites. And I think also, as I've learned more about her life and her personalities, I think she becomes kind of so much more alive to me in this music, because you can really hear her personality in some ways. And yeah, so I keep being surprised, I think, in her music, and I think she's truly a great composer for piano music, or of piano music, I think.
Now, before we go to the next music, you do kind of or you very often do a concert lecture, a kind of combination of concert and talking to the audience. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure, because I'm having the same problem in Norwegian, because I think lecture concerts, they sound kind of like
Hmm.
strict, or yeah, but
Yeah,
I
it
haven't
sounds.
really. Yeah, edutainment, maybe that's I'm not sure. I'm working on
Hmm.
finding a better title for it, but yeah, I mean, it
Okay.
is that I'm combining, music and talking. But I thought about the other day, before I came here to the US, I was back home in Oslo, and I went to the new Edvard Munch Art Museum, Munch with the
Hmm.
scream painting. So there's a
Yeah.
brand new museum there in Oslo, and there was this floor that was just this whole exhibition about his house, where they had drawn up like the house, the rooms of the house, and they had exhibited all his personal belongings, everything from paintbrushes to his hat and his knife and fork. And to me, that kind of, because I mean, you have he's a mainly painting, but you also get a sense of that there's a person behind this. And I think
Hmm.
then seeing his paintings with that in mind, I think it becomes an even stronger impression somehow. And that's kind of my philosophy for my concerts, to sort of make the composers come alive. They were normal human beings. It doesn't
Hmm.
always seem like it in music history, and I think it's also interesting to kind of try to take them down from the high pillars that they're often put on.
Hmm.
And I think the most interesting stories are, it's not like the year they were born, or I mean, it's all the fun anecdotes that make them come alive, and make us relate to them, I guess. So yeah, I guess I make concerts that I would want to listen to myself as an audience. And so it's usually a pretty good mix of almost 50-50, storytelling, or talking, and music, actually. And I've done it with several composers over the past 5-6 years.
What other composers have you done?
I done Edvard Grieg, of course, the great
Hmm.
Norwegian composer, and Claude Debussy, and I've done Clara Schumann, which was also very, very interesting, great life story. And I also done Chopin, where I played his four ballads, which I know some people say that you're not supposed to. I don't know. I remember when I was in school, someone said that putting the four ballads of Chopin together in one concert, that kind of, it's like it's too much
Hmm.
of something. But I think if you tell the stories in between, it became a pretty good concert. So I really like to go for the composers with the great stories, and I would
Hmm.
love to do a concert about Franz Liszt once, for example. I mean, I think he had a very interesting life, and there are so many composers to dig into and find anecdotes about, and give them, or make them come into life somehow.
Well, we'll get to Agathe Grøndahl's personality a bit, but after this music, which is one of the Hungarian studies. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to record that one because it shows her. Because I can say that, like, where she finished her schooling in Oslo, and then she insisted, I would say, to go abroad to study music. And she went to Berlin at the Theodor Kullak's Academy for 3 years. She graduated, as one of the top students of her class, both as a pianist and a composer. But then she also would travel with her sister, the painter, and they would go to Italy. And she was a student of Hans von Bülow for 4 months. He was a
Uh-huh.
pretty big deal back then.
Hmm.
She also went to Weimar in Germany and went to see Franz Liszt. And she was kind of accepted as a part of that very exclusive group that met 3 days a week, a whole summer, and had lessons with Franz Liszt at his house in Weimar. And then every Sunday, Liszt would play to them.
Hmm.
And I'm really surprised that that's not more known in Norway, because we know that Edvard Grieg met Liszt once, and everyone
Hmm.
keeps talking about that. But she was his student for months.
Right.
But I really wanted to show that she was influenced by it in her music, both in the concert etude, but also in this very kind of Hungarian piece. So it's an intermezzo, I think. Is that the right one? Yeah.
It's the intermezzo, track 12.
Yeah, great.
You definitely feel the Hungarian influence there. And
Yeah.
I guess the Hungarian influence of Liszt.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned that she went to Berlin to study, and that was not with the encouragement necessarily of her mother. I mean, there are people talking to her about getting married, and her own teacher said, you know, you really shouldn't look at music as a career because you're a woman, and you should look at it as a hobby. Seems like she was very determined and not somebody to be put off by anybody.
Yeah, I'm quite impressed because she had, I mean, lots of chances to, you know, stop working, and I think she must have been pretty determined also at such a young age when she was 17, and she, we know from her letters that she really, in a very polite way, but she told her teacher that you know, she really wants to do this, and she went to study. And then, of course, when she would have studied, it would have been easier for her maybe to just again get married. And because she was actually, she got engaged while she was a student in Berlin. But what's interesting is that they were engaged for 5 years. So she was engaged to another musician. He was a singer and a conductor, Olaus Andreas Grøndahl. And I think, because I mean, a lot of women in the 19th century, they would stop working or stop performing in public, a lot of female musicians, once they were married. But I think both because she married another musician, and also because they waited until they were 27. They were both 27 when they got married. She was pretty well established career-wise when they got married. So that wasn't really an issue. That's my impression, that she was, I mean, it was kind of also like with Clara and Robert Schumann, where people would come up to Robert Schumann after his wife's concerts, and they would ask, Mr. Schumann, are you also interested in music? That kind of so I mean, she was at times, Agathe Backer Grøndahl was at times earning more than her husband, so it's interesting, I think, to see.
That's impressive, because that can't have been the norm, what went on most of the time.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just I think it shows that if you were a good enough musician, in some cases you would be able to make it, but that wasn't always the case. But yeah, but it's really interesting to see how she also worked so systematically with PR and networking, and she organized all her concerts and tours and concert series herself, and she was a entrepreneur in a way.
She was a real entrepreneur. Tell us a bit more about that, because I think that people have no idea what that would look like at this time. I mean, we think of entrepreneurs and emails and internet.
Yeah.
But she would have been doing this all the very old-fashioned way.
Yeah, I mean, she was writing letters, and she was very well educated, so she could write and speak several languages. I think it's interesting that whenever she or Grieg would be in touch with England, they would write in German, because that was like the main language in Europe at the time, or in that. But yeah, she would use the network that she had, and she would actually write to influential people that she knew and get their recommendations. And also, when she performed in England, she wrote to Edvard Grieg, her close friend, and asked if, is there any way that I could contribute with anything on your upcoming trip? And they were good friends, so he said, of course. And she really, I think it's just, this is one of the things I think it's interesting to see. It doesn't really say anything about that in music history books, but what did the composers and the musicians actually do to make a career? And I think most composers they were pretty, they did a lot of work. It wasn't just their amazing music and coincidences. It was a lot of work and a lot of correspondence and letter writing. Yeah.
I mean, you read about some composers doing this. Handel organizing concerts in London, or Berlioz organized all kinds of big concerts in order to promote his music, but also the music of Beethoven.
Yeah.
But a lot of, I mean, you hear about it in a few cases, but I think people don't realize that most musicians, especially at that time, they had to do this.
Yeah.
There was no option.
Yeah. And
Let's hear another.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I think it's interesting also to see that it's not very far from my life as a freelance musician today. It's all about networking and PR, and of course, I mean, of course, you have to practice, but after you have your concert and you have your music, then there's all that other stuff, and I think it's quite similar. Although it is maybe easier to have internet than mail, and but still, there's a lot of similarities, I think.
With the internet, you can get a more instant response. I'm quite sure of that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Let's hear another of her pieces. This is track 5. It's from the 6 Idylles.
Yeah, it's a French title, actually. So yeah, Idylle, but it's definitely one of her character pieces, which so many other composers wrote a lot. I mean, Grieg had all his lyric pieces, and we know that these were really, and also like Sibelius had all his that kind of music that they would often perform in, or at least I know Agathe Backer Grøndahl would perform this music in concerts, also in addition to all her kind of big works. But she did it kind of to promote her sheet music sales. So I mean, she sold so much music, because we have to remind ourselves that there was no way to hear the music back then unless you played it yourself. So so she performed this music as well, and I think this is a very nice piece, Idyll.
Beautiful. That was one of 6 idylls by Agathe Grøndahl. Um, it's just such lovely music. Now, in the 1880s, Agathe Grøndahl was offered a job as the primary piano professor at the Peabody Institute of Music in Baltimore, which I think would have been an extraordinary offer. It would have been an interesting offer for most people, and a kind of extraordinary one to make a woman the primary piano professor, and she turned them down.
Yeah.
Why do you think she did that?
Yeah, and I think it's almost even more interesting that because she had the invitation, and then she kind of hesitated a bit, and then they also invited her husband to come over to give him a position. But that was, I mean, she was first offered, and then they would kind of offer her husband as well, but as a choir conductor and a singing teacher. But I think I try to look into why she turned down this offer, because it's, I mean, it could be such a great opportunity. But as I understand it, musical life in Baltimore and in that place at the time probably wasn't that much more developed than it was in Oslo. So I'm guessing that in Oslo she at least knew what she was what she was getting. She knew what she had, and she was also pretty well established there. And I think it has, because she was also invited to go to the US a little earlier by the Norwegian violinist Ole Bull, who was this Norwegian Paganini, this great virtuoso. Yeah, and she turned him down as well. But I think, I mean, he would go to the US a lot of times, and I think their personalities were so different. So I think for her, she would probably didn't want to take that kind of a risk, and I think that's more a personality thing than a gender thing in this case. But yeah, so I think there was, and she also she was very fond of her family. I think that was important to her. She was very close with her sisters, and I can just imagine that it was important to her to have those family members around her. But it is very interesting to see what would have happened if she would have gone to the US. And it's also, I think, fascinating to know that she was kind of a public figure in the US. She was talked about in newspapers, and they would review her concerts, and yeah. So, but she never went to USA. Unfortunately,
she never did in
no,
her lifetime.
no, she didn't. Yeah.
Now, didn't I remember reading something about Ole Bull inventing some kind of piano, or did I read that right?
Yeah, he had this brand new amazing invention, according to himself, with this grand piano that he claimed never needed tuning. And I looked into what was that, and the thing was that he had cast, is that word, the strings directly into the frame. So that meant that the strings were stuck in the frame, which was great for a while. But then when it became, not out of tune, it wasn't possible to tune it. So it was great for the 2 weeks or something that it stayed in tune. And then, yeah. So, I mean, it was probably a great idea, but unfortunately, so that was what he wanted Agathe Backer Grøndahl to promote that piano in the US.
Okay.
So,
it sounds like a theoretical good idea, but I've met people who said their pianos never needed tuning, and boy, they sounded like they really needed tuning.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's right.
I want to play a slightly longer piece here, which I believe is one of your favorites on the album, from the Fairy Tale Suite.
Yeah.
It's track 23. You can introduce it.
Yeah, sure. It's because I think she wrote 2 different suites, and one of them is she called it a fairy tale suite in the Blue Mountains is the title of the whole suite, and this one piece is called In the Hall of the Trolls. Hall of the Trolls, yeah, I Trollhallen. And it's I mean, Edvard Grieg was and is such an important ambassador for Norwegian folk music and Norwegian folklore. But Agathe Backer Grøndahl, at her time, she was almost equally important, I think, in presenting this Norwegian folk culture. And this was also at a time where we were still in a union with Sweden, so we were kind of fighting for our independence. So it was, yeah. So I think this music shows both her her way of using kind of titles from Norwegian fairy tales, that kind of thing. And also, I think it's interesting because another Norwegian composer who lived years after this, Pauline Hall, she said that this, according to her, this suite that Agathe Backer Grøndahl composed is probably the first example of impressionism in Norwegian classical music. So I think it's a great piece in so many ways. And again, I think it shows some of her personality as well.
Let's have a listen. That was from the fairy tale suite, the Trollhallen. So before we go on, I want to ask you about trolls because they have, I think, a place of great importance in Norwegian folklore and fairy tales that you don't find, certainly not here in the United States. So, how would you describe a troll and what they do?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, the troll. I think the trolls are. It has. I can explain like why. I think it has something to do with explaining why nature and why there's all these legends and myths about rock formations and weather phenomena and that kind of thing. So I think
Hmm.
that's where it comes from. But it's usually these underground creatures, and they were usually trying to lure you into. I'm not sure what happens if they're able to get you into the hall of the trolls or anything, or
Hmm.
in the mountain of the. But yeah, so it's in. I've grown up. I'm from the city of Oslo, but I still grown up with some fairy tales about some trolls. So it's definitely a part of the culture. And I'm not sure the trolls that you buy in the souvenir shops. That's not
Hmm.
really the ones that I'm picturing when I am hearing the fairy tales. But yeah.
Right, right.
Mm.
It's kind of like Krampus at Christmas.
Yeah.
People have this. Some people have like a cute version, and then you see all of the old illustrations, and oh boy, Krampus was like a horrible character.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of like, yeah. Sounds familiar. Mm.
So Agathe Grøndahl, I mean, she was a real musical force during her life, but her music compositions seem to be mostly forgotten. So are you planning to record more of her music?
I would love that because I feel like I've just scratched the surface. There's so much more. She composed more than 70 opuses of different types of music, so I think it's more than 400 single works. And
Wow.
especially, she also had two works for orchestra, or one of them is actually for orchestra and piano. So that is one
Hmm.
thing I would love to do. And also, there's just so much more piano music. So I would definitely love to look into that. Yeah.
And she would have played all this music herself in her own concerts, do you think?
Yeah, she performed. Yeah, she did that, and she would also make arrangements of a lot of her music because she was playing so many concerts in Oslo where she would just and those arrangements are unfortunately not printed anywhere because she just made them. Because if she was having a concert with a string quartet, she just made, a version for piano and string quartet of some composition that
Hmm.
she had wrote. So um, people probably heard her music so much in Norway, and she also traveled extensively in Norway. And because she was a mother and a woman, she was probably more in Norway than a lot of her male colleagues. But that also
Hmm.
made her. I mean, she toured more in her own country, and I think that made her really, or she had a closer kind of relationship with the Norwegian people and Norwegian audience. But I would definitely like to look more into her music, and I also was lucky enough to perform her cantata with a great female choir that I used to be a singer in here in Oslo. So she has some very interesting music that I think is definitely, yeah, interesting for us to hear today as well. Yeah.
Well, so today is kind of an introduction with more to come.
Yeah. Let's put it like that. Yeah.
We're going to play track 22 now. It's a romance, and I wanted to play this. It's just she has such a lovely way with melody. It's a short piece. Would you like to introduce it to us?
Yeah, sure. I think this piece and so many other Ravi pieces, it's almost like musical poetry. There are so many
Hmm.
details, and every time I play it or perform it, I think I discover something new. So yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites, and it's romanse from her 12 små fantasistykker, opus 55 or 55.
Beautiful, beautiful. We've got a little bit of time for a couple of questions, and one of the first is this music published? Because it seems perfect for amateur pianists. Obviously not all of it. So is it published?
Yes, it's actually all available online on that website that's called, I think it's emslp.org, the International Music something. Yeah, but everything is actually on there. So all her songs and it was published, most of her music was published in her lifetime, except for a few pieces that I've recorded, one piece that I've recorded. But yeah, it's all published and it sold very well. Yeah. Mm.
And someone is asking about where exactly you're going next. I know you're at St. Olaf College in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Or I think it's in Northfield. The next few days, and then where you're going.
Yeah, I'm heading down to Kansas City now on Friday, and then I have some friends there. So on Sunday, I'm playing a concert at a friend's house. So that's all sold out, all 25 places in his living room. So that's a very unofficial concert. But then I'm playing at the Steinway Piano Gallery in Lenexa, is Lenexa, which is in the Kansas City area. There's a little, limited number of seats, but I think if you contact the Steinway Piano Gallery in Lenexa, I think you're probably able to get a seat there. And I'm hoping to be back here in the US maybe already next year. So I'm very interested in anyone who wants to, have me come play either Agathe Backer Grøndahl or some other music. Yeah.
Well, we will keep following what you're doing, and obviously people can follow your website if they want to know what you're doing, and we hope for more recordings. We're going to go out now, I think. Listen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I know you've traveled a lot and you're doing concerts, and so it's a pleasure to talk to you. I want to thank a few people, Jesse Bobick, who does all the technical stuff, and Mark Forlow, my colleague with Apple Music, and everything he's done to promote this. We also have colleagues in Hong Kong and Manila who have helped put all this together. So it's a real international production crew. And I think a special thanks to Astrid Anvik, who is a fellow Norwegian who founded Grand Piano Records 10 years ago this month. And so it seems fitting to have a Norwegian pianist and a Norwegian composer being featured on this live stream. So Sara, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck for your concerts.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And we've got another video, I think, to finish things up.
Yeah, sure.